friends, welcome back. We are here for another lesson in poetry. I am going to take us back a giant step and we are going to analyze a poem today. So I wanted to quickly go over our objectives for today. So our reading objectives, most importantly, we're going to focus on the first one. I can read closely. I am going to read the poem for us today and we're going to dissect it a little bit. We're going to analyze that poem. So stay with me for that if you have already done that. And then we're going to move on towards the end of our lesson on being able to do the next few things. I can identify the structural makeup of a poem, and then also I can identify the impact figurative language has on a poem. So those last two objectives for today were your objectives from last week and yesterday. So take your mind back to what I had asked you to do, and we're going to revisit those things today. So in front of you for today's poetry lesson, I'm going to ask you to have out your reader-writer notebook for poetry. If you do not have one, make sure you grab a piece of paper to get yourself started. And I'm going to ask you to open up to page 11. So page 11 is the poem. We are going to read through this, and then we are going to talk about it. So don't worry about all the marks and makeups that I have on mine. I tried not to write on it too much. I wrote all my notes on a separate sheet of paper. So we are going to read through this, and then we're going to talk about it. We're going to analyze the poem. We're going to go through it, see what it means, give us some more light on what the poem is talking about. So your first task, if you remember, from a few days ago, your task number 1 was to read closely on turning 10. So that is exactly what we're going to do now as a review together. Let's get this nice and I'm going to keep it like this. Can I see the whole poem? Almost. Let's see. I'm trying to get it so I can see the whole thing. All right. There we go. Might have to move it. So again, the poem is titled On Turning 10 by Billy Collins. The whole idea of it makes me feel like I'm coming down with something worse than any stomach ache, or the headaches I get from reading in bad light. A kind of measles of the spirit, a mumps of the psyche, a disfiguring chickenpox of the soul. You tell me it is too early to be looking back, but that is because you have forgotten the perfect simplicity of being one, in the beautiful complexity introduced by 2. But I can lie on my bed and remember every digit. At 4, I was an Arabian wizard. I could make myself invisible by drinking a glass of milk a certain way. At 7, I was a soldier. At 9, a prince. But now, I am mostly at the window, watching the late afternoon light. Back then, it never fell so solemnly against the side of my treehouse, and my bicycle never leaned against the garage as it does today. All the dark blue speed drained out of it. This is the beginning of sadness, I say to myself as I walk through the universe in my sneakers. It is time to say goodbye to my imaginary friends. Time to turn the first big number. It seems only yesterday I used to believe there was nothing under my skin but light. If you cut me, I could shine. But now, when I fall upon the sidewalks of life, I skin my knees. I bleed. All right, so that was a reading of this poem again, On Turning 10 by Billy Collins. And you were supposed to read this and kind of dissect it, analyze it. Tell me more about it. What are you understanding? What are you not? So if we look at this poem, I went through and I numbered it just like we have done in the past. So I numbered each line. I went from 1 all the way down to 32. And then I broke the poem up into different stanzas. So Monday or Tuesday, I posted some different terms that we would be talking about through poetry. So if you look here, terms like alliteration, imagery, metaphor, meter, personification, rhyme scheme, rhythm, and then some more: simile, stanza, theme, tone. I asked you to keep those close, and the reason I did is because that is how you are closely going to read through a poem. You need to understand all of those vocabulary terms in order for us to move forward. So we're going to talk about a few of them now. One of them being a stanza. So a stanza is a division in a poem named for the number of lines it contains. So in this case, our poem was broken up into 5 different stanzas, 5 different blocks of different things the poem's talking about. And I labeled them for us on the side. You can do that to your poem now if you have not done that already. And then we're going to go through it a little bit. So if you think about this overall poem, so not just line by line yet, we're going to talk about the overall of the poem. And what do you think, or what have you noticed about this poem? I'd like you to write that down. So use your free space, use a separate sheet of paper, use a sticky note, whatever you have. I did supply you guys with notebooks, so take out your notebook and write. What do you think the narrator is reflecting on? What is the narrator doing in this poem? So I'd like you to pause or stop this video right now so that you can write that down so that we can all be on the same page for this poem. All right, so we're back. I hope you wrote down what you think this poem is overall talking about. So when we think about the overall message of a poem, what are we identifying? A theme, that's right. So we are identifying a theme to our poem. So if I had to place a theme on this poem, a theme I could use, so again, the theme is the message of the poem. So what is the overall message this poem is trying to get at? I put the theme as growing up is hard. Growing up is hard seems to be the theme, the message that the poem is constantly coming back to. So you can put this on a sticky, you can put it on the side, somewhere on here to identify the theme of the poem. If we continued and we talked a little bit more about the poem, overall, the narrator is reflecting thoughtfully on his sadness about turning 10. And if you look in here, somewhere it says, I can find it, the first big number, line 27 right here. The first big number. He's reflecting on that. He's showing his thoughtfulness, and then it turns into sadness on turning that number. So if we talk about the tone, the attitude towards growing up, so the mood that the author is creating. So again, if we go back to our terms, we have some of these here. Theme, the message about life that the poem conveys. And then also we have tone, the attitude or mood the author creates. And that's what I'd like you to think about now. So pause this video again, please, and take a minute to think. Write down tone or attitude. What do you think the tone of this poem is? All right, guys, welcome back. The tone. I asked you to think about and pause your video to think for a second about what the tone of this poem was, what the attitude was. So I put melancholy and thoughtfulness. So how the author is trying to make us feel. Melancholy, that sense of sadness, and thoughtfulness, very thoughtful. The poem is thinking back to how this person has felt in the past about turning different numbers, and it seemed to be joyful and happy. And now the tone or the attitude of the poem turned and it's a little bit melancholy, and it turns into sadness. And if you look here in stanza 4, this is the beginning of sadness. That's where the author has taken us, or the speaker of this poem took us to sadness. So the speaker or the narrative's attitude towards growing up seems to be negative. So this person does not want to turn 10, which some of you have turned already this year or are going to be turning. And I'm sure some of you have had the same outlook on turning 10 also. So if we keep going on and we see, I put a little squiggly here and I wrote shift. This is a big shift in the poem. So prior to stanza 3, if you look up here, this is a shift where the speaker describes what he feels like now compared to what he felt like then. So this is all from his past, before he turns 10. And if you see our last line, line 16 says, at 7 I was a soldier, at 9 a prince. He's describing all of his feelings and all of the things he got to turn when he turned a certain age. And then he goes down into stanza 3, and he's describing what his life was like now and to before, when he was 10. So this is a big shift. Now he's mostly just staring at the afternoon light that looks different. It fell solemnly now. So it didn't fall the same as when it did before he turned 10. And then also his bicycle leans differently. So it didn't lean against the garage as it did today. So he's comparing how it was before turning 10 to how it feels now as he is turning 10. I hope this makes sense to you guys. I'm trying to dissect this poem, analyze it as best I can when we're far away. All right. And then if you go to stanza 4 down here at the bottom, and we continue to go through, in stanza 4, there's another shift. And here he describes his new feeling. And that new feeling in stanza 4 tells us right away off the bat, right by reading line 24. This is the beginning of sadness, I say to myself. So he describes his new feeling of sadness. And he goes along to say that it's time to say goodbye to his imaginary friends. It's time to turn the first big number. And in this case, the first big number is turning 10. I hope we're getting this. Turning 10. And if we think about the theme of the poem again, this stanza number 4, is helping us to identify and lead us to the theme of the poem. So if you read this one more time, this is the beginning of sadness, I say to myself as I walk through the universe in my sneakers. It is time to say goodbye to my imaginary friends. Time to turn the first big number. Growing up's hard. That's our theme. That's what we identified as the message of the story, the theme of all of this. All right, so that's what I have for you for analyzing the poem. I hope that wasn't too much. But overall, if we bring it back to the overall of the poem, it's really just the narrator's reflecting thoughtfully on his sadness about turning the first big number. So about turning 10. It's just an overall reflection on what has happened in his past, and then moving down to describe what is happening now. So I hope that was helpful. I'm going to add one more thing to your task. So if you can turn with me to page 12, continue page 12. I still have not got one from everyone. Continue on page 12, answer that. Answer page 13 as well, and I'm hoping from what we just talked about will help you a little more to understand. And then I'd like you to move on to 14. So we just talked through the entire poem. So page 14 asks us, what does the text mean? A new understanding. What is the overall theme or understanding of the poem? Support your answer with at least 2 text details from the poem. So we just identified theme, and again, theme is the message the poem is trying to convey to us, or your understanding of the poem. So we just talked through that a lot. We analyzed the entire poem. So if you didn't have an understanding of the poem before, I'm hoping that you have a better understanding or a clearer understanding of the poem now. So those 3 pages are going to be your task, and then we'll move on the next few days. So again, page 14, page 13, and page 12. And if you need to rewatch this and analyze the poem with me again, oh, I lost a sticky. Analyze that poem with me again, please do so, because I think I have figured it out a little more on how to better deliver the information to you guys. So slow this down. When I say pause the video so that you can wait, think about the question I'm asking you, and then come back to review the answer of the question that I'm asking you guys. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you all soon.